Hello everyone. Today I wanted to do a video lecture for you about the beginning stages of the Roman Empire. So previously we talked about the end of the Roman Republic as Octavian becomes Augustus, and so now we're going to learn about the beginning of Augustus's reign and some of the emperors who came after him. So Emperor Augustus, formerly known as Octavian, he rules in Rome for over 40 years. So he has quite a long reign. And in that reign, he accumulated a tremendous amount of power for himself, really centralizing the authority in one person. Augustus placed individuals who were loyal to him in all of the important governmental positions to ensure that his power wouldn't be challenged. During this time period, the Roman Senate still remained, but it was basically just a rubber stamp for whatever Augustus wanted. And that's why we talk about the Roman Republic really coming to an end for all practical purposes. Another thing Augustus did is to reorganize the military system. So he created a standing army with commanders who owed allegiance to him. So there were no more small private armies by wealthy individuals and generals. And that way, again, no one could really challenge Augustus's authority. Augustus was considered a good and fair emperor. He did allow men of talent, not just of wealth, to have high-level jobs. He conducted a census, which is something we still do today. And a census is where you count the number of people who live in a particular area. And people use those numbers for things like taxation. So in order to make things fair, you need a count. And that idea of a census, as I said, is still something that our government does to this day. Augustus also granted more rights to people who had been conquered by Rome. He set up a postal service. He issued new coins to make trade easier. And that's a coin featuring his portrait on it. Caesar Augustus was his official title. He helped put people who didn't have jobs to work. He built a tremendous system of roads and aqueducts, and we'll go into more detail about that in a different section. And he was said to have given the poor bread and circuses, which means food and entertainment. So he wanted to keep people happy. And two great ways to keep people happy are to feed them and entertain them. So this period of time is known as the Pax Romana. That's a Latin word for Roman peace. And so during this time, the civil war stopped. The Pax Romana lasts for about 200 years, from 27 BC, when Augustus first comes to power, to 180 AD. So this time of Roman rule over vast amounts of territory brought relative peace, order, unity, and stability to the empire. As I said, roads were improved, which allows for better trade from one region to another. Laws and standards of justice were applied throughout the empire. The empire expanded to its farthest point, and I'll show you a map of that in just a minute. And as I said, this is one of the greatest times of Roman peace and prosperity. Now, there were still some wars that were going on at the time period, and not all of the emperors were great or fair, but overall, this was a relative time of peace. We do have some problems, as noted here at the bottom of this slide, with Germanic tribes who would try to challenge the Roman territories that were on the edges of the empire. And then there were still the slave revolts inside Rome, and a growing problem with sort of newly organized Christian the conflicts between Christians and Romans during this time period as well. So here we have a map that shows the extent of the Roman Empire during the Pax Romana, and you can see how really extensive Roman territory is. So right here is Rome itself. We talked before how they had expanded into Greece. Here's Carthage, the site of the Punic Wars. Talked about other earlier when they had expanded into Egypt and the relationships with Cleopatra. Here we have modern-day Turkey, parts of Asia. Here's what would have been Gaul then, modern-day France, and Spain. And finally, even into modern-day England. So after Augustus, not all of his successors were great. Some emperors did have tremendous accomplishments, but others were known as crazy and or corrupt. So we're going to go through a few of these different emperors right now, just to give you a sense of what type of people were in charge and what some of their major claims to fame are. So Tiberius comes after Augustus. He's a great military general, but he didn't even really want to be emperor. But he was just sort of next in the line of succession. And so after a time, he became reclusive and just sort of shied away from public life. An emperor who was not shy was Caligula, who comes next. He was described as being a good ruler for the first 6 months or so of his time as emperor, but what he's really remembered for as being quite cruel, sadistic, extravagant with money, sexually perverse. There are all kinds of colorful stories about parties that he threw, and he was possibly insane. He referred to himself as a god. He had several family members executed. He was quite paranoid, and he had a favorite horse shown here in this statue, and it was said that he had a stable of marble and a manger made out of ivory for this horse, and that he planned to name his horse as a consul, so as a major figure in Roman government. Not surprisingly, Caligula is assassinated. After Caligula, we have Claudius. He is known for conquering territory in Britain in 43 AD, and he also built a couple of major aqueducts. This picture here is an aqueduct. This is a series of arches connected together where there's a tunnel across the top that carries water like from the mountains to the city. And we'll be studying aqueducts in more detail later. Another emperor, not a very popular one at this point, is Nero. People accused Nero of setting fire to the city of Rome itself. And they said that he had set the fire on purpose so that he could rebuild the city and a new palace for himself. Nero blamed the fire on Christians and persecuted them. Christian persecution was very common during this time period, and they were easy targets to use as scapegoats. Eventually, Nero commits suicide after being declared a public enemy by the Senate. So during the Flavian dynasty, this is when we see the Colosseum being built by the Emperor Vespasian. Unfortunately, he died 1 year before the Colosseum was finished, so he never got to see it really come to its conclusion. But his son, I believe, Titus, did see that, and when the Colosseum first opened, there were 100 straight days of festivals, and during that time period, approximately 5,000 animals were killed in the gladiator games inside the Colosseum. We'll be studying the Colosseum in more detail as well in a later session. Then we have the Emperor Domitian, who was popular with people and the military, but was considered a tyrant by the Senate, and he eventually is assassinated. It was quite common for emperors to be assassinated, as you can see. Then we come into the period of the good emperors. We've got Trajan. This is the time of the very, very largest extent of the Roman Empire in 117 AD, where it extends all the way well into England. We have Hadrian next. He wrote down and standardized Roman law, making it the same for all provinces. So whether you were in Africa or Rome or Egypt or Gaul, Roman law was still the same. Hadrian had a wall built in present-day England called Hadrian's Wall, and parts of that land still exist today. And this was the northernmost boundary of the Roman Empire. Hadrian also built a building called the Pantheon, and Pan means all and Theo means God, and so the Pantheon is a temple to all the gods. We'll be learning about that. It's a tremendous architectural structure. And finally in this list we have Marcus Aurelius. He was known as a Stoic philosopher, a statesman, and an emperor, and quite a famous figure in history. So here you go with a picture and a map of Hadrian's Wall. So this is modern day England, and this pink line indicates the location of the wall. So they were essentially trying to divide this top part of their empire to keep these other invading people from coming into Roman territory. The wall is 73 miles long. It's 10 feet wide and approximately, and 16 to 20 feet high, and there were forts every 5 miles or so. And so here's, like I said, in the English countryside, you can see the wall all along here, and then this structure would have been where a fort would have been built back in ancient times. And finally, here's your first look at the building called the Pantheon that I mentioned. This is in Rome itself. It's kind of an interesting combination of structures where you have the front looks quite Greek with Corinthian columns and a pediment, and then the back is circular. So it has this circular dome up here with an actual hole in the top called an oculus where sunlight can come through. And here's what it looks like from inside. Just a tremendous structure. And still to this day, the Pantheon is the largest unsupported concrete dome in the world. So that means that inside this space, there's no structural support. It just supports itself with the degree of curvature and how it all ties in together at the top. So a really tremendous architectural achievement. All right, that's it for this video lecture. I hope you learned a few things about the early days of the Roman Empire.